Good morning from the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. I'm Ramayad, Senior Director of the Africa Center. It's my pleasure to moderate this webinar in partnership with the Policy Center for the New South, the prominent Morocco-based think tank. Together and under its executive president leadership, Karim El Ainaoui, we have launched this Atlantic project comprised of a series of publications on the power of the Atlantic Ocean. As the second largest ocean, the Atlantic, as you know, covers 17% of the world's surface and borders about 100 countries from Americas to Europe and Africa. The African nations on the ocean shore represent 46% of the continent's population and 55% of its GDP. The blue economy is crucial for Africa as the continent's economies see new changes brought upon by issues related to the maritime energy transition, the port revolution, maritime transport, fishing, and control over exclusive economic zones. After a first report by William Yancey Brown on marine energy a few months ago, today we host a conversation with Maisie Pigeon to talk about a new report on piracy, criminal activity, and maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea. Because beyond the opportunities, there are many threats to and from the Atlantic, and that require attention and actions. In the Gulf of Guinea, one of the world's most strategically significant maritime regions for commerce and shipping, piracy remains a critical security and development concern. Before Maisie shares her key findings of the report, I would like you to listen to our first speaker, His Excellency Sidi Temoko Touré, Minister of Animal and Fisheries Resources of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, a coastal country of the Gulf of Guinea. While he was visiting the Atlantic Council last week, he kindly accepted to share his vision, his actions, and expectations. Over to you, Minister.
La piraterie maritime est un sujet extrêmement important pour notre sous-région ouest africaine. Ces dernières années, nous avons connu une prolifération de navires qui, souvent sous le chapeau de la pêche, font certes de la pêche illégale, mais d'autres en profitent pour embarquer des initiatives non légales dans ces différentes embarcations. En tant que ministre en charge de la pêche de la Côte d'Ivoire, dans le cadre du réseau des ministres en charge de la pêche qui couvre les zones côtières, nous avons mis en place un programme qui a créé un centre d'observation satellitaire partagé par l'ensemble des pays de la côte, Libéria, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, sans oublier certainement la Mauritanie, qui concourent ensemble à l'effet d'observer tous les mouvements illicites qui ont lieu sur la côte de la façade de la mer. Et cette initiative est accompagnée aussi par une initiative beaucoup plus large qui couvre toute l'Afrique à travers un programme qui est installé au Maroc à l'effet de pouvoir donner les meilleures pratiques et se préserver sur tout ce qui peut se dérouler dans ces différentes eaux. Malheureusement, il n'y a pas que l'approche ou l'observation de la pêche illégale. Il faut garder en mémoire la problématique du djihadisme dans les zones sahéliennes, qui, si elles aboutissent à avoir un accès à la mer, changerait entièrement la donne et compliquerait la tâche de la sécurisation complète de toute l'Afrique. Il nous faut avoir un regard déterminé à travers des dispositifs, modernes de vision et de régulation satellitaire à l'effet de traquer tout ce qui s'adonne à la lutte ou qui s'adonne au commerce ou à l'action illicite en mer par la piraterie. En tout cas, nos gouvernements sont engagés, que ce soit dans le domaine du secteur de la pêche, mais aussi dans le domaine sécuritaire, à l'effet de trouver des réponses structurelles à cette problématique qui touche aujourd'hui toutes les côtes africaines. Merci beaucoup.
We are grateful, Minister. Toure took the time to deliver this statement and testifies about the realities of a coastal country from the Gulf of Guinea. Now, Dr. Ifesinahi Okafor Yarwood, welcome, Dr. Okafor Yarwood. We are grateful you accepted to deliver a short keynote to add your perspectives as a lecturer in sustainable futures at the School of Geography and Sustainable Development at the University of St. Andrews. Your research has generated critical insights across several key areas, including the blue economy I just mentioned, environmental justice, human security, maritime governance, and security. You advance a deeper understanding in the interactions between ocean sustainability, development, and criminal activities. Over to you, Dr. Okafor Yarwood.
Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador, for inviting me to be part of this program. I am very excited to be here and speak before the official launch or discussion around the topic, Atlantic piracy, current threats, and maritime governance in the Gulf of Guinea. For me, it's always a privilege to contribute to conversations that take maritime security seriously, not just as a technical or strategic concern, but as a question of justice, ownership, and the future of our shared ocean. In my work in oceans governance and maritime security, I have consistently highlighted the need for a holistic approach to oceans governance and maritime security, specifically as it relates to Africa. Because I believe that we need a holistic response, one that engages the structural, political, social, and economic conditions that allow these threats to persist. The report highlights the current trends around maritime threats, specifically piracy in the Gulf of Guinea, and I will leave this discussion for the author of the report, Maisie, to highlight. However, as part of my keynote, I'd like to reflect on one area that continues to demand our attention, the question of regional knowledge, production, data sharing, and ownership. Calls for a more integrated approach to maritime security are receiving greater attention. In 2023, for example, we heard at the UN Peacebuilding Commission talk about the need for root causes approach to addressing piracy and maritime security in general in the Gulf of Guinea. And in May this year, we also heard the UN Secretary General re-echo this thing as part of a global vision for addressing maritime security. Yet, despite what appears to be a consensus on the need for a holistic approach to maritime threats, a persistent disconnect remains that I feel we need to sort of address, and I wanted to use this opportunity to highlight it. And specifically, this relates to data disparities. Since 2018, for instance, the Interregional Coordination Center, ICC in Yaoundé, has been documenting maritime incidents in the Gulf of Guinea. Platforms such as Yaris have strengthened regional coordination, enabling information sharing in real time and just swift response to incidents. They have also not only led to improvement in information sharing, but have contributed directly to the reduction in incidents of piracy and armed robbery at sea, something that we will hear when we hear about the key points of the report. And yet, when it comes to global reporting, including important reports at the international level when it comes to discussing data sets, databases and reporting centers outside the region, such as the IMB in Kuala Lumpur, for instance, or m.gov in France, continue to shape the dominant narrative. Ship owners still often report incidents to centers outside the region, which are often passed back to regional bodies. In effect, the region is often not treated as the first point of contact, nor as the authoritative source when reporting incidents on piracy. This raises an important question. If we are asking coastal states in the region to invest in regional tools and take ownership of maritime security infrastructure, then are we doing our part by recognizing and using the systems that are already available? This is not simply a technical issue. I feel it is political, and we don't have the time to go deeper into it. But when regional data centers are overlooked and bypassed, their credibility is undermined. It creates a circle where international actors call for a local leadership, but do not engage with the outputs of that leadership. Without consistent validation and use, there is little incentive for national authorities to sustain or invest in platforms such as YARIS. For instance, now more than ever, especially when the EU funding for YARIS is due to end in August, the region is being asked to take full ownership, but ownership must be matched by support. If regional tools are not perceived as important to the international community, including by insurance companies, why should governments allocate limited resources to maintain them? Progress requires partnership, but meaningful partnership must be rooted in mutual respect, shared responsibility, and a willingness to center local systems, expertise, and infrastructure, not bypass them. While I acknowledge, as we will see from the report, that challenges remain, I believe that we must not overlook the significant achievements and progress made by the region over the years when it comes to combating piracy and robbery at sea. The tools do exist. The knowledge also exists. The region is not waiting to be saved. It is already leading the way. Our task now is to recognize, invest, collaborate, and stand behind that leadership. I'd like to re-echo my appreciation to the Atlantic Council for inviting me, and thank all of you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Okafor Yarwood, for the strong views that help us to set a path for this conversation. There's a lot to think about already from your remarks. So we really appreciate that. Now I am transitioning to the conversation with Maisie Pigeon. Maisie, you are the director of the Coalition for Fisheries Transparency, an international network of civil society organizations committed to improving data transparency in the fisheries sector. Prior to joining the CFT, you spent over a decade working alongside governments and international organizations to promote initiatives to secure maritime spaces, encourage ocean governance, promote blue economy growth, and stabilize coastal communities in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere. You have provided consultation and research support to the Global Maritime Crime Program at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the International Maritime Organization too, and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. There was no better expert than you to author this report. So we are gratefully accepted to join the Atlantic Council for this key work that will be potentially read by citizens from the 13 African coastal countries of the Gulf of Guinea, including powerhouses like Nigeria, DRC, Angola, or Cameroon. So Maisie, let's start with this question. What is the Gulf of Guinea first? What is covered by your research? And why this area matters so much that it deserves this important focus.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. It is my pleasure to be here, and I'm so grateful to the Atlantic Council and the Africa Center for inviting me to contribute to this important research. So for the purposes of this brief, the Gulf of Guinea spans from Senegal in the north to Angola in the south and includes the small island developing states like Sao Tome, Cabo Verde. This region is inclusive of Francophone, Anglophone, and Lusophone states. And it's important because it's really quite a vital area. The body of water itself is an economic hub for the region because it connects countries to the wider region as well as to global trade and provides connectivity for landlocked states as well. There are major international shipping routes connecting Africa, the Americas, Europe that run through the Gulf of Guinea. It is rich in oil and gas reserves and other resources. It is a rich fishing grounds. And of course, there is considerable interest from global powers, including China, the European Union, the US, and others.
Mm-hmm. And what does piracy mean? I mean, piracy seems to belong to the ancient times, you know, for the the public, the audience who is not familiar with this expertise, what does piracy means? What kind of activities behind this word right now in current times?
That's a good question. So the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea would define piracy, as they did in Article 101, as illegal acts of violence, detention, or depredation committed for private ends, which distinguishes these actors from terrorists or politically motivated groups, committed by a crew of a private vessel against another ship, its crew or passengers. And incidents, this is important, are taking place on the high seas, outside the jurisdiction of a state. So piracy is a crime that under UNCLOS has universal jurisdiction, meaning that a state doesn't require a direct nexus to the crime in order to prosecute perpetrators. In the Gulf of Guinea, according to that UNCLOS definition, what we are typically seeing are not considered acts of piracy because they're often taking place in a state's EEZ, exclusive economic zone, or territorial waters. So those incidents would be categorized as armed robbery at sea. And in terms of the MO, it spans several different kinds of activity. There is kidnap for ransom. There is hijacking a vessel for ransom. There is oil siphoning, cargo theft, and then just plain old violence against vessels and the crews.
Yeah. So they have a lot of organizational structures, with these different pirate groups operating in different countries. I guess different tactics, or is there a regional pattern?
Within the Gulf of Guinea, I would categorize it as a regional structure, regional patterns. So we don't see too many differences in tactics or organizational structures across pirate groups here. But typically in the Gulf of Guinea, incidents are either illegal oil siphoning, whereby these perpetrators are boarding an oil vessel and siphoning product from the original vessel onto a secondary vessel to sell product on the black market, or kidnap for ransom, whereby pirates are boarding a vessel and then taking quote unquote high value crew members, typically captains, first mates, or engineers, removing them from the vessel, bringing them to pirate camps on shore, and awaiting a ransom to be paid.
We a few years ago, we heard about the same tactics or phenomenon happening in the Horn of Africa. Do you see any difference between piracy in the Gulf of Guinea and piracy in the Horn of Africa?
These are two pretty different models, actually. So in the Horn of Africa, piracy typically employed hijack for ransom, where an entire vessel and its crew were held captive until a ransom was paid by insurance companies or a shipping company or family members of the kidnapped crew. Whereas in the Gulf of Guinea, as I mentioned, we typically are either seeing illegal oil siphoning or kidnap for ransom of specific crew members. It's also worthwhile to mention that in the Gulf of Guinea, these acts are typically much more violent, though shorter in duration than we would see at the peak of piracy in the Horn of Africa.
Interesting. And what about if we go further in the land, from the Gulf of Guinea to the land, the Sahelian countries? These past years, we have seen many coastal countries like Benin and Côte d'Ivoire being attacked, even if they are not Saharan countries, being attacked by jihadist terrorists coming from the Sahel region. And we understand that these jihadists are in contact with drug traffickers from Latin America. So how do you analyze this new reality, this connection between Saharan jihadists and Latin America drug traffickers?
It's a really important question for geopolitical purposes, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime has pointed to increasing links between transnational organized groups and terrorist groups over the last several years, like you mentioned. I think these groups typically come into contact because they're exploiting the same weak systems of governance, the same porous borders, and sometimes the same trafficking routes as well. More specifically, in the instance of the transatlantic cocaine trafficking, the Gulf of Guinea is a transit hub, meaning cocaine coming from Latin America is stopping in the Gulf of Guinea before moving northward into European markets. And often trade routes, including illicit ones, are along linguistic lines. So Brazil to Guinea-Bissau, for instance. And over the course of this, partnerships have developed. Latin American traffickers are working with West African criminal networks to move trafficked goods from land or from the waterways to across landways. Meanwhile, you also have jihadist groups who are taking advantage of those trafficking routes. They might tax traffickers or engage directly in smuggling of people, weapons, wildlife products, you name it. I think you really, at the end of the day, can't underestimate the opportunistic nature of either of these groups.
You mentioned drug traffics, kidnappings, and all these things. But in your report, you also note that the incidents have been down the last few years. Do you feel the region has gotten a handle on the situation? Are you more optimistic for the future?
Reported incidents have been on the decline since the mid-2010s, and that is due to, like Dr. Okafor Yarwood said, much of the regional and international coordination efforts that have been put in place since that time. So things like the Yaoundé architecture and the G7++ Friends of Gulf of Guinea. Also efforts from the Nigerian Navy and the Nigerian Maritime Administration have really helped to secure high-risk areas. There is international naval presence, such as those from the European Union and G7 navies, which really help to complement those regional initiatives. But like I sort of alluded to, pirate groups are really adaptable. We have seen over the course of the last decade or two that pirate groups were able to shift their operations geographically from where they were once really highly concentrated in Nigerian waters, have ballooned out to other countries in West Africa like Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Cameroon. They have also adapted their tactics depending on need and opportunity. So the oil crash in 2014 forced pirates to pivot their tactics from predominantly oil siphoning to more of a kidnap for ransom model because the risk reward ratio was more favorable for kidnap for ransom. And then the other things that are worth mentioning are these underlying root causes remain the same. Poverty, unemployment, corruption, these have been unaddressed in a significant way. One more point I'll make is there are competing security priorities, which you just mentioned, with the jihadist groups in the north of these countries. So many states are prioritizing, perhaps rightly so, the security threats in the north of the country, which does compete for resources and attention with maritime crimes. So in general, I would say I'm optimistic, but cautiously so. Tactical improvements are definitely evident, but the systemic socio-political challenges keep the threat alive, and I would certainly recommend continued vigilance for anybody transiting the area.
You just mentioned, and you did, and as well in your report, you highlight poverty and economic marginalization as key drivers of piracy. Is it the case for I mean, where do these pirates come from? Do they come because Cote d'Ivoire, for example, is one of the wealthiest countries in the coastal among these coastal states. In the Sahel, it's much more complicated, of course. But what are for you the goal would be to redirect the economic intervention from the north to the coast, or is there any other viable economic alternative for these pirates?
I have seen a few program recommendations that to me make a lot of sense. And those would include things like cash for work programs to help build coastal infrastructure, namely ports and fish markets. I like that idea because it provides immediate income, but it also contributes to long-term opportunities in coastal communities. I've also seen programs aimed at developing skills in mechanics or fish processing, which are valuable skills in coastal economies. And also, to me, especially from my current position working on fisheries transparency, improving market access for fishers to access domestic and export markets for their seafood products can be really, really valuable economically.
Before going to deeper into your recommendations, can we say more about not the pirates themselves, but the coastal communities who live there? What is the impact? Can you talk a bit about some of the impacts of piracy on seafarers, on coastal communities? How do they, I mean, do they send their kids, the young people, into this kind of adventure, or do they resist, or are they affected? Or what is the impact on African communities?
Widespread impacts. I think the most direct victims of piracy are, of course, the seafarers who are taken hostage or subject to the violence and trauma. Family members of crew members who are taken hostage are also subject to significant trauma in that ordeal. But I'm glad that you mentioned the impacts on coastal communities, because I think that that's an often forgotten victim in this situation in the Gulf of Guinea. They face weakened economies because maritime crime is an obstacle to greater investment. It also exacerbates poverty. Piracy perpetuates economic inequality, in fact, because where pirate groups set up camp, they may gift occasional community support to win hearts and minds, but profits are mainly flowing to these high-level pirate facilitators rather than the community writ large. To your point, you just said, Ambassador, pirate recruits are often coming from these vulnerable, impoverished coastal areas because they're drawn by the prospect of economic stability, greater income, social mobility. The operational costs of piracy are quite significant, from skiffs or the small boats that are used to attack the larger vessels, weapons, bribes, sponsorships. So it's really developing this whole economic ecosystem of crime. Pirate networks deepen local corruption, which is certainly worth mentioning here. Bribes are paid to politicians and security forces, which enable pirates to continue their operations unimpeded. And that ultimately erodes trust in governance. There's impunity and state complicity in these crimes. An influx of weapons contributes to the normalization of violence in these communities. And over time, these people are developing feelings of being unprotected and disenfranchised.
So, I mean, these groups, they don't care about borders or frontiers. You know, they go through the borders using the water. So, I guess the Gulf of Guinea countries have developed mechanisms to facilitate, to work together and facilitate regional cooperation. What is your opinion about this regional cooperation? Is it successful? And diving into your own recommendations, how could they be improved?
Absolutely. So the primary mechanism in the region is the Yaoundé Code of Conduct, which was first adopted in 2013. And it has definitely improved regional coordination. As a result of the Yaoundé Code of Conduct, 5 distinct maritime security zones were created with coordination centers who all talk to one another. And there are definitely positive examples of cross-national information sharing here, perhaps none more famous than the 2016 MT Maximus incident, where 6 different countries across the region shared information and collaborated to track and recapture a hijacked vessel and free the crew. Also, as a result of the Yaoundé Code, regional naval patrols have become more routine. International partners like the EU continue to provide crucial support because they see the value in the Yaoundé architecture. But a few pieces that are worth noting in terms of potential improvements, these efforts are largely donor dependent. And one thing I want to point out is, as this threat appears contained, that may make making the case for international support for counter-piracy efforts increasingly difficult for coastal states. Another thing that the Yaoundé Code recommends is harmonization of national piracy codes, but that has really happened to a limited extent, which makes prosecution across borders difficult and inconsistent. So relatedly, legal follow-through has been historically weak. From what I can see, there have been only 3 piracy cases to have gone to trial over the last decade, and that's despite hundreds of incidents and dozens of captures. So capacity constraints are also a factor here. And as I mentioned, the competing priorities on a national level, which divert attention and resources. So in terms of improvements needed, I think the 3 most important are legal alignment in domestic piracy codes, sustainable financing models to ensure that this coordination can continue into the long term, and technological investments like satellites and drones, which will enhance monitoring and rapid response without requiring too many more personnel.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned earlier that you have advised a lot of international organizations at the UN and in Europe. How do you see the role these partners outside the Gulf of Guinea could play or have played in combating piracy and supporting these countries?
External navies like those from the European Union and G7 countries have been really vital partners in the fight against piracy and armed robbery at sea in this region. They've provided deterrence through joint patrols and presence in high-risk areas. The European Union has been quite a consistent supporter of the Yaoundé architecture through funding, capacity building, providing training and technical assistance. International exercises like the US-led Obengame Express have helped to improve interoperability and skills among regional navies. UN initiatives have helped to develop governance responses. And external partners also help to build technological capacity through provision of things like satellite imagery, communication technology, drones, things like that. The international funding component is really essential here, as regional responses are under-resourced and vulnerable to political shifts. Simultaneously, external actors can really help to apply diplomatic pressure to encourage legal reforms that we would like to see, which would help long-term legal frameworks. So in summary, sustained external engagement is really vital, especially as global attention risks shifting to other crises like Ukraine or Gaza, because the EU and others have much to gain from a secure Gulf of Guinea. With all that said, I would like to echo Dr. Okafor-Yarwood in saying that regional ownership of these efforts is absolutely essential. ensuring efforts strengthen local governance and maritime security capabilities. So international partners absolutely must align with that approach and that leadership.
And coming back to the local initiatives, you highlight the importance of the Yaoundé Code of Conduct. What are the most important? What are its most important successes and most critical weaknesses?
I think the legacy of the Yaoundé Code is the information sharing across countries. It has really normalized information sharing on a regional level. It hasn't been perfect. There is certainly room for improvement in terms of real-time reporting. Again, I think that echoes what Dr. Okafor Yarwood mentioned in her opening remarks, but this is light years ahead of where things were in terms of regional information sharing before the onset of the Yaoundé Code.
We know that among the international organizations or partners, including global powers, we know that China is very active in the Gulf of Guinea, notably in fishing, for example, and a lot of other activities. So does China play a role here in terms of providing solutions to these issues?
Yeah, I think there are a couple different layers to this question. So as you mentioned, China is one of the actors contributing to the declining fisheries in West Africa. So what I would like to see personally is that there are fair fishing agreements set up in the region, which would help local fishermen to profit from their catches more equitably. But they are also a security force in the region, and they have cooperated with regional forces as well. So they are certainly a player in this space.
From the experience, the Somali piracy experience, is there any lessons we can learn from that and replicate in the Gulf?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was asking, can lessons be learned from the world's response to Somali piracy be replicated in the Gulf of Guinea?
I think there are several lessons that can be brought from the Horn of Africa, namely the cooperation across naval forces in the region. They are very different problems, and that's worth noting because there are not as many sovereign states in the east coast of Africa. So that information sharing component is absolutely essential, as are the harmonization of legal codes in Gulf of Guinea, and that is a really important distinction. But the information sharing and the legal consequences that pirates in the Horn of Africa faced, I think, are very important lessons to bring to the Gulf of Guinea as well.
So some experts predict, we talked about this earlier, a stabilization of the security situation in 2025. Right now, you noticed less reportings and things like that. What a success could look like in combating piracy in the Gulf? What would need to happen for victory to be declared?
In my opinion, it really has to be a holistic approach that incorporates a maritime enforcement component as well as development of socioeconomic conditions in coastal communities. I think those two things in coordination will really help to solve this problem in the long term.
I would like to say to our viewers and those who are listening that your report is live today on the Atlantic Council website, and the readers will find your key recommendations. And I would like to mention the 4 key recommendations that can summarize your insights today. Continue and enhance regional collaboration and information sharing. That is key in your report. Target prosecutions, of course. 3, create programs to foster alternative livelihoods. and 4, garner continued support of international partners. So this is really something important. I would like to draw to our public's attention. I have a last question for you, maybe more personal, Maisie. Why? Because it's pretty unusual. Why did you decide to work on piracy issues? I remember when we first met, you told me that you also advise streaming companies like Netflix on piracy movies, on TV. So what is so special in working in piracy issues? Why you think it's important?
To me, I've always been drawn to really complex problems, but piracy in particular, I find a really compelling challenge because I think that it requires sound cooperation from governments, civil society, and industry. And without all 3 of those puzzle pieces in place, I think we are less likely to achieve success. And that is really appealing to me.
Thank you very much. And we are really grateful, Maisie, you took the time to outline the key findings of your reports. There's very relevant recommendations, and I encourage our audience to look into the details. It's very well explained, not too much technicality. So this is really something we appreciate. And we do believe that for decision makers from coastal countries and international partners, this is really an interesting and relevant roadmap for their work in combating piracy in the Gulf of Guinea. So I think it's time to wrap up our conversation. I would like to thank you, Maisie, once again for your time, for this excellent report. And we will continue to work on this Atlantic project in partnership with the Policy Center for the New South, because in the Atlantic, there is many opportunities, many threats that deserve to be brought to your attention. So thank you very much, and see you soon.